Firstly, we're sat on stage, and there's 4 chairs here, and there's only 2 people sat down. So let's talk about that before we continue on with our conversation.
Yeah, I think it's an intentional prop. I mean, 2 of my friends, Suleiman Kangani and Nancy Akinyi from Kenya, were meant to join me on stage today. But as is often the case, the rules are a bit different for them. And to travel here was impossibly hard. We started a month in advance. They were kindly and graciously invited by Rouleur and by POC Sports. But the visas didn't arrive in time, so just have to imagine what it would be like if they were here to help me with this conversation. And hopefully, as we progress and we get enough people involved in this coalition, then these problems start to go by the wayside and we get a little bit of momentum.
So Michael, give us a bit more about your background that ultimately led to you starting this initiative and why you feel it's important.
So, yeah, I'm not really from the cycling industry. I'm a lawyer. I work at the International Criminal Court, and I spent the last 12 years working in countries in East Africa. The International Criminal Court focuses on things like genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. And as you can imagine, it's a bit grim to do that as a day job. But in my heart, I'm a cyclist and a big cycling fan. And over the last 12 years, I really kind of just geeked out on the cycling scene in East Africa and was really just kind of listening and trying to understand why these phenomenal athletes weren't progressing. And based in Holland, a kind of cycling mecca, I thought at some stage that maybe we could leverage that position, being in Holland, with friends in the Dutch Cycling Federation, to try to create some opportunities for these athletes so that they could participate in the sport we love.
So what was the first step for you in creating the team? At what point did you think, how can I help these people? And what form would that take? So how did that actually, what was the turning point, the catalyst for the team actually forming?
So even just to start, I never say anything like, I'm trying to help these people. It's really not about me at all, to be honest. It's about being a cycling fan and caring about your sport. And do you want this sport to be a regional sport? Do you want it just to involve Western Europeans, or do you want it to involve the whole world? And I think so from a selfish perspective, I want it to be a global sport. I want to see the best in the world compete.
It's not really selfish though, is it? That's what I'd like to think that most people think, most humans would think, that we want sport to be global,
Yeah, I mean, one, it's more interesting, but 2, from an intrinsic sense of fairness. How can you have all these fantastic athletes who just can't play? I think it appeals to your sort of childhood sense of what's right and wrong. Let them on the pitch, let them play. So that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to create opportunities for these guys who really want to access this sport.
And do you think, because of the lens that you look through life at, through your work, through your profession, do you think that because you've seen such disproportionate, overwhelmingly destructive injustice, that you felt that something like cycling perhaps should be easy to do?
We had this discussion yesterday, and we got like real sort of metaphysical.
We did.
But yeah, when you think about, look, there's so many things happening in the world today. The world seems, by all accounts, on any daily news feed, that it's spinning out of control. Climate issues, geopolitical issues. And then when you kind of like walk it back and you think about, what are we really talking about here? We're talking about a small sport and a small issue. Is it really that intractable? Is it really that difficult to create opportunities for other people to play in this game? When you think about these kind of mega crises at the meta level, it's actually not that difficult. It just takes a bunch of people, and this is the point of this conversation, is to get a bunch of people together and say, you know what? From our particular position, our platform, whatever it is, whether you're a fan or you're in the cycling industry, we're just going to try a bit harder to open the door. And it's not a charity case, They don't need your sympathy. They just need opportunities, and that's the point.
So the team itself, I'm intrigued with the name. Where did the name come from? Where was that born out of?
Yeah, so Amani is a Swahili word. It means peace, and it's just a concept that I became quite familiar with in my time at work, and so Yeah, originally it was an idea that, you know, a lot of these countries that we work in are post-conflict countries, and the stories that are, I mean, yeah, the background of our riders and what they have to overcome to even get on the bike in the first place is really quite considerable. So like when you compare apples to apples, right? Like a kid from E10 versus a kid from Leuven, and the baggage that kid from E10 has to bring with him on the bike, it might as well be like a 40-kilo rucksack versus the kid from Leuven. So there are a lot of things, and it's nobody's fault. It's nobody has a responsibility per se individually to redress this imbalance. And some people will think, well, that's just the way the world works. But the point is that I think if we really wanted to, just bringing it back, we could take that rucksack off the kid from E10. We could, and just let them see. Like, let's see what they can do when it really is apples to apples. And again, I think selfishly, why the hell wouldn't we do that? You know, like, don't we want to see, you know, kids from all over the world competing in the hills and in the climbs in the Tour de France?
I think to go back a step, when you look at just the simple joy and the liberating feeling, just having the opportunity to ride a bike as well is powerful in itself, let alone taking that another step further and competing at whatever level you want, whether it's a cyclist sportif, whether it's ultimately wanting to represent your country. Every point in between, the bike gives you some sort of liberty and some sort of freedom, that's why you guys are here today. That's why you've decided to come and listen. So I think that's important as well. But from a nuts and bolts perspective, talk to us about where the project's based, how it works. And I also understand there's 3 particular strands as well, which we need to talk about to get a fuller understanding of how the team actually works and operates and what its objectives are. So first up, where's it based and how does it work?
So the first thing about this project is that, look, I spent a lot of time dealing with the underbelly of international development. And I think that the biggest problem with international development is, one, it's an institution that's built to kind of service itself and perpetuate itself into perpetuity. And it loses sight quite quickly of the underlying goal. So let's say the international development project is based on raising income, you know, income generating projects, or if it's about health standards and criteria. I mean, these projects have been in Africa for 50, 60 years. And have they achieved their stated goal? I would argue they haven't. In fact, they fill spaces that should be filled by states themselves in Africa in order to develop, in order to build that sustainable capacity on their own. They fill that space, and it is still a lever of power from the global north over the global south. Why am I giving you this speech? This project is meant to be essentially the opposite of that. We start from, and it sounds like nothing, but in fact, if you were in this world, you would see that it's quite different. I have no ideas. I didn't have a strategy. I wasn't like, this is what you guys need to break into the sport. It's not for me to say. What we did was we came with absolute humility and said, what is happening? Why aren't you getting there? What are some of the obstacles that you're facing? And they were the ones who articulated it from the countries in Kenya, the athletes in Kenya, Rwanda, and Uganda. And then we just set about creating opportunities based on those problems that were identified. And so the first one...
It's rare things happen that way in the world, isn't it? People assume that we know a problem, so we're just going to address it without actually asking what the root problem is quite often. It's
true, but you know, I understand that. Like, I get that we have blind spots. And if you don't know that you have blind spots, you don't know to look there. And so, yeah, that was basically the only insight I brought from my professional life to this project, was to shut up and listen. And when I did, and when we did as an organization, we just heard the most amazing things. Like, and all of us, it's what supercharged us in terms of our motivation, because you just think, that is bullshit. How can it be like that? How so many hurdles, and easily overcomable hurdles. I don't want to leave you the impression that this is a problem that can't be solved. It can be, quite easily. But you have to know where to look. So the first project that we had was pre-pandemic. We heard that cyclists, basically, 1 or 2 from the top tiers of their teams get this kind of like dream shot to come and race in Europe. And it was a really pressure-packed audition. And basically the people who were providing that opportunity already had in their minds that this wasn't going to work. But because they were facing pressure to, you know, make cycling more inclusive and various other things. They just kind of threw these guys in there. And for myriad reasons, it didn't work out, whether it be that they didn't perform on the day. Think about the cultural and linguistic barriers that someone has. You know, even an American traveling to France, let alone someone from Kenya coming to, you know, Belgium or wherever it may be. And then there's like financial, there's just even basic things like I go to the grocery store, you know, and buy my own food so that I can be ready tomorrow for the race. These aren't things that people will consider because they go, well, we don't do this for the Belgian kid, so why the hell should we do it for the kid from Kigali? And this, I understand the basic premise of the egalitarian, you know, push, but at the same time, these aren't apples. We're not comparing apples and apples. And so the first project that we launched was, okay, let's bring some kids to Holland in a very warm and welcoming environment with some, you know, elite level athletes who are going to sacrifice everything for these guys, give them some racing opportunities, but more importantly, some cultural experiences in Europe. So they have a frame of reference. So when they do get that call, they're not just like, oh my God, you know, everything at once. So that was the first project, and then of course the pandemic hit, and then we had to go back to the drawing board because nobody was traveling to Holland. And then we faced a real existential risk in the sense that it was bad for all, even the World Tour teams, in the sense that they didn't have a riding calendar. But you can imagine that the financial situation for development teams in Africa is, notoriously bad in cycling in general, but exponentially bad in East Africa. And almost all of the teams were faced with potential closure because they had no racing opportunities and no way to show brand recognition and various other things. So we quickly pivoted to the online platform. And it ended up being quite, you know, they say necessity is the mother of all invention, and it really was in this case, because with a relatively minor investment from a key partner like Wahoo, we were able to put smart trainers in the clubhouses themselves. For the cost of a single international flight, we had the entire teams racing internationally in Uganda, Kenya, and Rwanda.
So it's on Zwift platform, wasn't it?
Zwift.
To connect everybody.
Yeah, on Zwift. So that was really cool, and now it's been a kind of, a big leveler, I think, in the sense of like, now it's not just that one or two athletes who get that chance, but now everybody is getting a chance to see, okay, what are guys doing at that A++ level? What kind of numbers are they generating, and can we generate them? Because again, another big issue that we have in terms of barriers to entry is that access to international competition. You can be forgiven if you are the best in your club, you know, for thinking that you're good. You know, you're the first one up the climb, and everyone thinks you're the local legend, and you know, you're like, wow, man, I'm really into this. I'm a really good cyclist. And then you realize that there's another hill in another town, and those kids are way better than you. And then, you know, you keep going internationally, and this is how, you know, people reach the climax of our sport. But if you can't get to that next hill, you plateau. I mean, every cyclist can understand that. And so, Zwift gave us an opportunity to kind of show these guys where the level is, that if they're not already there, where they need to be.
Yeah, and I guess, although that solved a problem, also moving forward, that's something that is going to be an intrinsically important part of the structure to keep people connected perpetually as well, which is nice. Yeah. So it solved a problem, but it also has offered you another solution for something you didn't even think was a problem. Totally. It helps just bind everybody together. Now, we've had a lot of beautiful images that have been scrolling through of this beautiful African countryside, gravel, because this is another strand of the whole project, isn't it? Which isn't just a gravel ride, it's something more than that. And for me, it's the most intriguing part. To explain the third strand of the project.
So the third strand is the migration gravel race. And essentially, now I gave you this whole speech about fairness and about access to the sport. And it was in this context and in these conversations, our guys were saying, look, what is all this gravel business that's happening? And by the way, our whole country is littered with gravel roads. And we've been riding them our whole lives. So maybe we should, you know, so the conversation started that maybe, okay, we have this beautiful natural resource. We organized this race in the Maasai Mara, which is one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. But from a project perspective, it started to really, tick a lot of boxes in the sense that, one, instead of having these guys with this massively, pressure-packed audition for only 1 or 2 riders in Europe, where they feel culturally and linguistically everything isolated and in a world foreign to their own. How about we try to lure international riders to come and race in their backyard? And in so doing, right, these guys get a chance to ride in a place they've never seen before, experience things will never experience in their lives, but they will also be doing us a service.
That's a cracking picture, isn't it? That is absolute corker, isn't it? Look at that. Blimey.
They'll also be doing us a service by giving Wasawa Peter an opportunity to see where he's at against the best in the world. And you can't do that in road cycling. You can't just rock up to the Tour de France and line up next to Geraint Thomas and just see how you go. But that's what's cool about gravel. Gravel doesn't have the same barriers to entry as road cycling, and so it's something that we're really looking very closely at, because after 15 years of trying with a sort of maniacal focus on road cycling, I think it's really time, and this is what we're doing now, to really look outside the box, all of the above approach, anywhere and everywhere, whether it be ultra endurance events or gravel events or mountain biking events, we'll try it all. But the difference is we do not want to send any athletes into any events that they're not ready for. Because we don't want to perpetuate the stereotype of, okay, well, this person's here because of some charity, because of some woke sensibility that we just got to have a black face here. That's not what we want. Because what we're really trying to tell you is that we have these athletes, and they should be in these races. They are talented enough. They don't need your sympathy, and they don't need your charity. They just need an opportunity. Now, does that mean that they're ready for the World Tour to win Grand Tour stages? No, it doesn't mean that. But does it mean that they could be in that final selection in Unbound? Yeah, I think so.
Well, it's about affecting change, and that might even take a generation. But if those barriers are broken down, and they get more access to things like this, more access to come abroad, and also you get other organisations looking at your model and thinking, well, this is important, and it gains momentum. Somebody has to start from somewhere. And the intriguing thing about this as well was, I was reading about it earlier. You got involved with the Maasai people as well to help marshal, and they were paid to help run the event as well, which is essentially showcasing where they live as well. So there's another aspect to it that's quite interesting as well, but from a business model perspective too.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, it's a moral issue. And if we want to tie it back to the crisis of our day in terms of the environment, you cannot expect people who own this land to just keep it pristine when they have issues with respect to feeding their children and creating livelihood and opportunities for their families, the same issues that we all have. And we're like, oh, but we get sentimental about animals. Well, don't put fences up, the poor wildebeest. And they're going, well, how come you don't cry over the fact that my children don't have enough to eat, which I think is a very fair retort. So what we're trying to do with this is to say, look, the unspoiled, undeveloped land has intrinsic value, and we're going to pay you for it. And we're going to create opportunities for your kids and for the adults who are unemployed to come and be part of this race. Look, I don't want to overstate the importance of a 4-day bike race, but it has to start somewhere. You got to start somewhere and say, look, this is what you should expect. Don't let anybody come on your land and not pay you for the use of it, And yeah, so that's the idea, I think, with respect to our relationship with the Maasai.
Have you ridden it?
I've done the recon.
Right, okay.
Which
was that the full 650k recon?
Yeah.
Nice. And what was it like? It must have been an amazing experience.
It was awful.
It was awful. What I mean, amazing. There's many tenets to amazing, isn't it? So it was awful.
Well, because the thing is, I mean, I'm not a professional cyclist, and but I rode with some to do the recon, and I mean, I got my ass kicked. But that was the point, because you can't get, we couldn't showcase the beautiful diversity of the Mara without doing considerable distance, but you can't also allure people to come to, or lure people to come to Kenya unless it's a big event. It's a far trip. So we needed to make it long, and we needed to make it hard, and then we were hoping that then we can really showcase the talent of our athletes. And so, and the funny thing is that up until the day before it happened, I mean, this, keep in mind, we had the first edition this year, and we had like Unbound 1 and 2 there, which was really cool with Ian Boswell and Lawrence Tendam and Thomas Dekker and various others. But we weren't sure until the day it happened that it was gonna happen. You know, like I was just waiting for the call that says like, I don't know, all international travel closed, COVID restriction in the middle of stage 2. You know, like everything. It was wild. But kudos for everyone who had the courage and the gumption to show up. And the big thing, the big unknown about this race is that we didn't know how our athletes would fare. You know, at the time, the Rwandans were thought to be the best in the sense of the pecking order was Rwanda.
Well, they have a pretty decent racing scene around it, don't
Exactly.
they? Comparatively speaking to the rest of Africa.
Totally. And they've had exposure and a lot of resources poured into their country in terms of cycling for 20 years. So it was thought to be Rwanda, Kenya, Uganda. But it turns out that the Kenyans have a knack for riding off-road.
Right.
And they were really kicking some ass, and it was awesome to see.
That's fantastic.
So, yeah. This guy here is Kenneth Karaya. He's, you might have just heard about him. He rode with Lachlan Morton in Cape Epic last week, which is just another example of, you know, someone like Lachlan being like, how can I help? And I'm like, use your platform, right? And if you get an opportunity, create an opportunity. And that's precisely what he did, you know? He just called me up and he said, do you have a rider? Alex House broke his hand. I'd love to ride with one of your guys. And we had a guy, and they went and did it. So, and it was a beautiful opportunity for Kenneth to progress, because he was the best mountain biker in Kenya, but he'd never competed against the best in the world. And now he knows precisely what he needs to do to get to that level.
And what's not the feedback, that's not the right word, but speaking to the riders who are in Holland, in The Hague, with you, near to where you work, what's it been like interacting with them? How have you seen them develop as people that, what has their response to being given these opportunities been like? I would imagine it must be quite wonderful to see play out, really.
Do you know what's actually, I think was more interesting is the development that our Dutch colleagues, my Dutch friends, had through their interaction with these guys. And even, I think, Lachlan and Gus Morton would tell you about all of the insight that they gained over a week and a half spending with Kenneth. It's not a one-way street. It's not just like, oh, look, I did a good thing here today. If you really open yourself up to redressing or to looking into these spaces that you might have blind spots in, it's amazing what you might find. It's like going on a trip to a new country the first time, you know? You come back a different person. And I think, so this two-way development, this two-way dialogue is something really neat about this project. From our guys' perspective, I mean, obviously going to Europe and giving the opportunities, I mean, they were doing things like crit races that they'd never done before and doing quite well against, you know, 85 kg Dutchmen in headwind that they've never faced before. And so it was really cool. I mean, it was good to see.
And you must, just thinking ahead a little bit to the World Championships in Rwanda in a few years' time, that must be, although it's separate to your project, it's an indication that things are slowly getting better. I'm personally fascinated about that, how it's going to play out. I mean, are you looking forward to that as well? Are you going to be involved in any way at all from the sidelines, or?
Well, I mean, our athletes will hopefully be participating in it. That's the goal. Yep. Especially from Rwanda. So, yeah, I mean, it's great. It's great. It shows that that the world, that the UCI at least sees that this sport is bigger than, you know, just Western Europe, and is making an investment. So not just talking this game about inclusivity, but making an investment and a step forward in that direction. So I think that's really positive. Rwanda is a great place to start. We were talking about it yesterday about the fans. I mean,
it's insane. Some of the images of that race are just insane.
The sport, it's like Colombia, you know, like it's really getting there.
There's a fanaticism, isn't there, which you can feel. Just the images are very, very powerful. You can feel the passion there.
So imagine how it will be when they get their first hero.
Yeah.
And that's what we're really trying to build with a guy like Sule Kangani. This is Felix. There's a couple of others there. I mean, if they make a breakout performance in gravel, for example. You know, they come home, they make a little bit of money, they build a house. Kids see this. Next thing you know, like we have a whole generation now who want to ride bikes instead of, you know, in the example of Kenya, running. because cycling is a path forward. Look what Sule did, you know? Sule built a house by riding a bike. This is a viable path forward. This is how it has to start. And yeah, again, breakout performances, heroes, then we're really going to see the culture of cycling, I think, in East Africa explode.
And how can people get involved? Where can people find the platform? Because I know you're always interested in speaking to business partners, etc.
Yeah.
So how can people get involved?
Look, I mean, I think you have to ask yourself, like we were talking about before, there's a lot of things in this world, especially today, that we just can't change. And it does leave you with a sense of like disempowerment. But cycling is a niche thing. It's a small thing when you really think about it. And in fact, maybe it's an opportunity for us in this little small space that we inhabit to kind of create the environment we want to live in. And the way you do that, and it's not just through BS rhetoric. It's through just using your particular, whether you're just a fan or you work as a product manager for a bike manufacturer or whatever it is. You're an announcer. You use your platform to try to create opportunities for these guys to get into this sport. It's as simple as that, really. Like, and you know how you can personally do it based on how you're situated. I mean, if you want to know more about our project, you can obviously follow us on Instagram or check out our website. But I really invite you all, anyone who really calls himself a true fan of this sport, to really think about what you could do personally to, just to create an opportunity for an individual. We're talking about individuals, guys who want to get on the pitch, guys who want to play our game, and who should be there. That's the big thing. They should be there. It's not that this is a charity or let's see how they go, and no, they should be there. So let's let them play.
I think that's a wonderful way to end it. Just let them play. I mean, it's the most human thing that we can do, but we just need to think a little bit differently, don't we? That's for sure. But first and foremost, thanks very much for having a listen. It's been quite an intimate little crowd. A few more of you have come in, but I hope you've enjoyed and been intrigued. And this has piqued your interest, and hopefully you will go away from here and think a little bit differently, because it's a wonderful project. It's more than a project. It's a movement, isn't it? Hopefully a movement for permanent perpetual change. But Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, mate. Yeah, thanks very much indeed. And thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you.